Just moments ago, newly released sensor data from Skinwalker Ranch revealed a disturbing discovery. Something beneath the mesa is moving right now. Not residual activity from past excavations, not random geological noise, but an active, trackable pattern shifting underground in ways that match no known natural behavior. According to internal reports, this movement aligns exactly with areas previously linked to unexplained interference and crew illness. Investigators say this new data suggests the phenomenon is not only still active, but responding. Subscribe now, because tonight's findings may confirm that whatever lies beneath the ranch has just reawakened. For months following the halted excavation, Skinwalker Ranch entered a state of monitored silence. No digging, no invasive scanning, only passive data gathering. The assumption among analysts was straightforward. If they left the ground undisturbed, activity beneath the mesa would gradually stabilize. And for a while, that appeared to be true. Minor tremors were recorded, but nothing unusual. Then, late last night, the automated monitoring system flagged an alert from beneath the mesa that immediately invalidated months of cautious optimism. For the first time since the shutdown, the ground didn't just react, it initiated. At 1:03 a.m., seismic mapping software registered a pattern unlike the random interference typically seen during anomalous spikes. It was directional, shifting laterally, not vertically, tracing a defined path across the underground scan grid. The anomaly moved 4.8 meters east, paused for exactly 12 seconds, then continued north toward a previous staging zone used during earlier core sampling. What alarmed analysts was not just the motion itself, but what it aligned with. The movement traced the exact positions where key personnel stood during final excavation, down to the recorded foot placements of field techs captured on satellite positional logs. Phil Torres, who was first contacted to verify the reading, reportedly responded with disbelief, saying, "There's no reason for the ground to echo human movement patterns unless something is referencing them." The system repeated the anomaly shift twice in under 15 minutes, forming a trail that didn't follow geologic fault lines, but human presence intervals. This was the first time since the shutdown that recorded movement suggested memory, not reaction. That implication triggered immediate escalation, and when thermal sampling was compared to seismic data during the shift, the deeper truth became impossible to ignore. Something beneath Skinwalker Ranch isn't just active again, it's moving with purpose. Once seismic tracking confirmed underground movement, analysts cross-referenced the data using advanced thermal imaging software calibrated for subsurface fluctuations. Typically, ground heat signatures disperse in irregular patterns based on moisture and density, but this one didn't disperse. It traveled. The system detected a cold void, not a heat source, moving beneath the soil layers along the same path identified by seismic tracking. It was as if something was absorbing heat as it shifted through the earth, leaving behind a measurable temperature drop that trailed it like a wake. The void registered at -1.4 degrees Celsius relative to surrounding ground temperature, forming a perfectly defined mass profile approximately 1.6 meters long and 0.5 meters wide. But the most unsettling part wasn't the size, it was the cadence. The movement paused at consistent intervals of 11 seconds, matching the rhythmic timing from the initial excavation disturbance. The interval also aligned precisely with the reported heartbeat acceleration pattern from the technician who collapsed during the earlier dig. Two independent analysts flagged this as potential biometric synchronization, though no one officially used the term tracking. Even more alarming was what thermal overlay revealed when matched against archived human positioning. As the void passed beneath areas where crew members had previously stood, the heat deficit intensified briefly, almost as if responding to residual presence. One thermal technician privately described it as recognition through imprint. When asked to elaborate, he refused, saying only, "It didn't move randomly, it navigated." At exactly 3:27 a.m., The anomaly slowed beneath what was once the core drill alignment. Then, for the first time since monitoring began, the system detected an upward temperature differential, meaning the cold mass had moved closer to the surface. It remained elevated for 5 full seconds before lowering again, triggering a Stage 4 proximity alert. Nothing broke through, nothing physically emerged, but one thing became clear. It wasn't descending further into the Earth, it was working its way toward the surface, and toward where the team had been. With seismic and thermal data now indicating directed movement underground, the team deployed an aerial drone to monitor the area from above. The goal was simple: avoid physical contact with the ground while gathering downward-facing imaging to cross-verify thermal signatures. The equipment was rated for electromagnetic interference and had flown dozens of previous assignments at the ranch without incident. But this flight wouldn't last 90 seconds. At exactly 2:11 a.m., the drone reached 18 feet above the excavation zone perimeter before its altitude began to drop unexpectedly. Flight logs showed no pilot error, no wind, no navigation input. The drone's propulsion systems were functioning normally, yet something unseen exerted downward force, steadily guiding the drone toward the soil in a slow, unnatural descent. The onboard stabilizers activated automatically to counteract what the system classified as negative lift pressure, but each correction only slowed the descent temporarily. Then, telemetry feed captured something chilling: a harmonic pulse, identical to the sub-frequency signature recorded on the night the excavation was halted, spiked through the drone's onboard audio. A fraction of a second later, the gimbal-mounted thermal camera detected the same cold void beneath the surface, shifting directly beneath the drone's position. The aircraft continued to descend, reaching just under 6 feet above the ground before emergency autopilot disconnected from control. The live operator attempted manual override, but the system recognized a false altitude reading, displaying the drone as resting on the surface even though it remained airborne. Then, at 6 feet, 4 inches above the mesa, every onboard sensor flashed red simultaneously. The drone's final captured image showed a compression effect on the soil, as if something beneath it flexed upward in response to the drone's proximity. The pilot, panicking, cut power entirely, forcing a free fall to prevent further interaction. The unit landed hard in a safe zone outside the anomaly perimeter. Impact analysis confirmed no internal damage from the fall, but the altitude barometer was corrupted beyond repair. Phil reviewed the footage later and said only, "It wasn't the drone being pulled down. It was the ground reaching up." This incident marked a turning point. Underground movement wasn't just shifting, it was responding to observation. And the next data would prove it could adapt. What happened next forced analysts to abandon conventional geological interpretation. Reviewing the seismic displacement data alongside the drone telemetry, one researcher noticed a recurring time interval that appeared in every recorded event tied to the anomaly. From the technician collapse during the previous dig to the drone failure just hours earlier. The movement beneath the mesa wasn't random. It pulsed at exactly 11.2-second interval, identical to the tachycardic rhythm experienced by the technician during his medical episode months ago. At first, they believed this to be an algorithmic glitch, until an independent cross-analysis confirmed the rhythm aligned with the average human respiratory cycle under stress. That's when an internal candidate from the biometric forensics team flagged something more disturbing. The interval also matched the exact heartbeat pattern of the technician recorded during his collapse, down to the millisecond timestamp. When thermal data and seismic movement were layered over the technician's health monitor logs, the anomaly's displacement calibrated almost perfectly with his physiological response at the time of the digging incident. It wasn't simply tracking motion, it was copying rhythm. Some dismissed this as coincidence, but further review showed the same cadence repeating at a moment when no humans were present on site, suggesting the anomaly was running a cycle, as though replaying the interaction. The lead analyst commented privately that the mass movement displayed adaptive repetition, a trait not found in any geological or mechanical event. He refrained from using the word learning, but internal notes reflect that was exactly what he meant. Cautiously, The team activated a controlled test, simulating a low-frequency pulse through ground sensors calibrated to match the technician's heartbeat under anxiety. Within 40 seconds, seismic feedback spiked exactly at the test modulation site. The anomaly appeared to shift toward the simulated source. To the researchers, this was undeniable. It didn't just move, it reacted. And if it could react to physiological rhythm, then it was potentially interacting with human stress response itself. No one vocalized it at the time, but the unspoken realization left the room in silence. This wasn't just environmental. It behaved as if it remembered them and could come back. After reviewing the seismic and thermal data showing reactive rhythmic movement, the team began searching for what could have reactivated the anomaly after months of inactivity. There had been no excavation, no drilling, and no direct intervention at the site. Instead, the only new operation involved non-invasive ground scanning using high-frequency LiDAR and subsurface mapping tools positioned along the mesa's edge. These systems were chosen specifically because they wouldn't disturb the soil, but what they didn't anticipate was that detection alone could function as interaction. The scan was initiated at 22:41 the previous evening, targeting a zone adjacent to the original excavation site. Within minutes, the software identified inconsistencies in the soil density, areas shifting micrometers at slow intervals. What puzzled the analysts was that the movement wasn't increasing. It was synchronizing with the scanning pulses. The anomaly appeared to adjust its timing to the mapping signals, forming a delayed echo effect that mirrored the scan cycle. It wasn't resisting detection, it was aligning to it. The next hour saw the mapping team increase depth resolution, which should have produced more detailed readings. Instead, the scan abruptly returned conflicting surface profiles, showing layered fluctuations inconsistent with time progression. The deeper the scan attempted to see, the less stable the reading became, almost like the subterranean density was recalibrating itself, adapting to visibility range. One engineer described it as the system pushing back against clarity. But what became most concerning was that this increase in scan depth coincided exactly with the anomaly's first horizontal shift in months. Further analysis determined that the anomaly had changed velocity after the scan intensified, moving toward the mapping equipment location. It wasn't retreating, it advanced. Then, shortly after the final scan cycle, seismic logs captured a microspike, originating directly below the scanner array before traveling along the path previously linked to personnel position. Only then did they realize the possibility they had avoided acknowledging since the excavation, that identifying the anomaly triggers engagement. It wasn't the digging that woke it up this time, it was being observed. One senior analyst would later summarize it best. It didn't respond to intrusion, it responded to recognition, and the team had just given it their full attention. Following the LiDAR scan response, analysts began reviewing secondary data collected from auxiliary monitoring devices positioned around the testing zone. Among the files was a ground microphone acoustic stream assigned only to backup archival storage, not intended for active review. The recording was triggered automatically when the seismic irregularity reached threshold status. Initially dismissed as subsoil friction noise, one engineer isolated the track and noticed a repeating modulation embedded within the waveform. It wasn't random. It followed the same 11.2-second cycle detected in seismic activity and temperature variation. When the file was amplified and slowed by 75%, the pattern became clear. It wasn't a constant resonance. It fluctuated as if responding to external input, but the most unsettling moment occurred when it was run through dynamic filtering. What had appeared as low-frequency vibration shifted tonal profile and began mimicking cadence markers associated with vocal resonance. Engineers stared as the filtered data output resembled breath, deep, drawn out, followed by silence, repeated in perfect sync with the previously recorded pulse timing. A second acoustic specialist tested the file against livestock interference history, atmospheric anomalies, even tunneling rodents. Nothing matched. The signal displayed intentional frequency shifts, subtle but precise. It almost mirrored stress breathing patterns. Upon further refinement, another layer appeared, faint modulation that formed intermittent rises in pitch, consistent with proto-speech formation. Not words, not language, but an attempt. The audio ended abruptly. the moment scanning devices were powered down. When played to a small panel that included Phil and one of the on-site medical personnel, both reported feeling pressure in their chests at the same timestamp. The medic had to step out of the room. In her written report, she noted, "Exposure produced tension localized between sternum and diaphragm. Felt anticipatory." One analyst broke protocol and wrote beside the waveform excerpt, "This isn't sound being transmitted, it's behavior being expressed." No one officially used the phrase, but the implication was undeniable. It wasn't just moving, it was responding to being monitored and, possibly, attempting to communicate. During the sensor review, analysts discovered a brief clip recorded by a non-primary perimeter thermal camera, one that had not been included in the central tracking grid. The device was intended for wildlife detection and border breach alerts, not anomaly analysis. It operated on a delayed relay system and should not have been syncing to seismic or acoustic events. Yet at 3:02 a.m., precisely when the audio signature reached its peak, the camera triggered. The recording shows an empty stretch of soil near the outer edge of the mesa, undisturbed and motionless, under low-light infrared. For 6 seconds, nothing happens. Then, the ground begins to bulge. Subtle at first, almost imperceptible. Dirt shifts upward, not from pressure above, but as if something below was pushing gently against it, testing resistance. The compression rises roughly 2.5 centimeters before settling back down, leaving no visible trace afterward. When slowed down and enhanced, the bulge appears to briefly maintain an outline, approximately 1.7 meters tall if extrapolated vertically, not in a humanoid form, but in a density field matching the dimensions of prior underground void movement. The anomaly did not breach the surface. Instead, it receded like it was aware of being observed. A faint distortion trails outward, correlating directly with the chest pressure sensation reported by crew members earlier in the night. The camera's metadata indicated a motion trigger from below origin, even though no sensor on that device should be capable of detecting subterranean displacement. Analysts attempted to rerun the file, but on subsequent viewings, the bulge did not reproduce in the same resolution. Raw data remained intact, but visual clarity degraded, as if the thermal snapshot had destabilized after extraction. A shaken technician described the first viewing in his notes. "It rose toward the camera like it was checking if we were still watching." The clip was immediately added to restricted files, marked under non-physical expression, potential conscious environmental reaction. A new threshold alert was added to the system. Classify anomaly, subsurface emergence behavior. None of the crew at ground level had seen the event live. If the footage hadn't been caught on archive relay, no one would have known it happened. Within hours of confirming the thermal emergence recording, an urgent internal advisory was drafted and circulated to senior personnel. It did not follow standard incident reporting format. It was written as a directive. The message, stamped "Immediate Operational Cease, Subsurface Interaction," explicitly prohibited all excavation, drilling, scanning, or sensor-driven probing beneath ranch soil until further notice. Even low-impact mapping procedures were suspended. The advisory emphasized that current field activity had transitioned from observation to engagement without deliberate intent, posing what was classified as unquantifiable kinetic risk. Brandon Fugel personally convened an emergency remote briefing. Witnesses said his tone was controlled but noticeably more severe than during the previous shutdown. According to internal sources, he stated, "This is not about containment anymore. It's about recognition. We know it's responsive. The more we probe, the more we interact." He went on to say that all further attempts to measure or interfere with the anomaly risked escalation, and that the safest course was distance, not analysis through contact. Though he didn't use the word sentient, several present said the implication was clear. The new operational guidelines now limited investigations to indirect observation only, atmospheric readings, aerial thermal imaging, and signal tracking from beyond anomaly manually registered grid points. All underground data collection was prohibited. The advisory also included an unprecedented note requiring psychological monitoring for any crew exposed to the dig site or who had reviewed the recent file. This is the first time in the ranch's investigation history where personnel safety protocol extended beyond physical threat to interpretational exposure. As the advisory closed, Fugel delivered one final instruction in writing. We analyze what's above. We do not disturb what's below. There will be no exceptions. But as night approached and sensors continued reporting movement beneath the mesa, another question surfaced among the analytics team. If observing it triggers response, what happens when it realizes we've stopped looking? Following the advisory, ground contact ceased entirely. No further scans, no drones over the excavation zone. Everything shifted to passive monitoring. For the first 18 hours, activity dropped to near zero. Then, at 4:12 a.m. this morning, sensors recorded 3 short seismic pulses originating directly beneath the former dig site, each exactly 11.2 seconds apart. No lateral movement this time, no temperature shift, just a signal, then silence. Analysts believe it may have registered the sudden absence of observation. One theory suggests that after mimicking human physiological rhythms, it may now be waiting for re-engagement. The most recent scan confirms that the anomaly is still present, still stationary, directly below the sealed zone. But here's the detail that forced renewed alert status. The pulses were not measured as pressure. They were categorized as contact. It didn't retreat deeper underground. It pressed lightly upward. It knows we're still here, and it hasn't moved away. For now, no one will dig. But the newest data makes one thing disturbingly clear. It might not need us to dig again. Next activity cycle is projected in 36 hours.